Well, again, good morning, church. It is a joy to be with you here at Bowden. My GPS says Bowden, but I think it's Bowden. And it's been a real joy to be with you yesterday and again here today. And you're such a fine congregation, and we've just felt so blessed to be here. And we thank you for your kind comments. I appreciate the kind way that Josh has introduced me. And I even appreciate the song that was sung just a moment ago. It kind of reminds me of a preacher friend of mine that said that right before he got up to speak one time, they led the song, Ready to Suffer. So hopefully we're not ready to suffer today, but that things will be pleasing to God and be profitable to everyone. We're talking about family, and we're going to get right on into it this morning as we think about the things that help us. Today we're going to talk about the Ten Commandments, but not the Ten Commandments that we know as the Ten Commandments. But today I want to talk about the 10 commandments for families. And as we think about these 10 things, I think there again, I want to be as practical as I can. I told you I start out here and then I try to get down some things that are really very basic but yet very practical, and things not only that we might learn for the first time, but sometimes we're reminded of because we need to be reminded of things we've known for a long time. So today we'll find probably some of both. So let's begin with the 10 commandments for families. Number one, you shall make your family a priority. Going back to yesterday for just a moment, we remember from Deuteronomy chapter 6 that God had told Israel, I want you first of all to take these commandments that I gave you and put them in your heart. Then he said, I want you to teach them diligently to your children. And I want you to do that when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lie down at night, kind of like the old Waltons, before you say good night, John boy, there's some things I need to tell you. And then when you're walking by the way, and in every situation of life, he said, I want you to teach your children about me. But the thing that we said about that, it takes time. It takes time when you're sitting in your house. It takes time when you're walking by the way. I remember something that is really a fond memory of mine with my dad. We lived 1 mile from the church building. And when it was good weather, and not especially hot outside, then my dad sometimes would say, son, let's get ready a little early this morning and let's walk to church. And so we would do that. And we'd have about a dozen cars to stop on the way, say, you having problems? Do you need some help? Need a ride? And we say, no, we're doing this on purpose. And we would walk, and I couldn't wait until church was over to ask him, can we walk back home again? But you see, it's not that I enjoyed walking so much, although I didn't mind that. It was that I spent time with my dad. Because we could just talk about everything. And it takes a little time to walk a mile. And it takes a little time to walk that mile back. And sometimes we had conversations that we never really had the opportunity to do at other times. So it takes time. And we said yesterday that values are more easily caught than they are taught. And so as I was with him, I learned a lot about what I need to do to be a dad one day myself, and just how to be a man in this world. Families ought to be a priority to every one of us. Yesterday, we also said, according to the most recent statistics, that we learned that now families spend about 37 minutes together on any given day. But I believe we can do that better than that if we'll just plan and think about what we need to do as families and think about how important families are. It's interesting, one of the old stories that you might have heard before came out of the 1800s and 19th century, and it was Charles Francis Adams. Some of you might remember that story from history or learn about his life. He was a politician. In fact, he was Lincoln's ambassador to Great Britain during the Civil War. But he was always busy. He had a wife, had kids, but he didn't spend a lot of time with them. I suppose he could have if he had made that time, but he didn't. He kind of chose his work as a priority. He had several kids, as I say, but one son by the name of Brooks, on one unlikely day, I suppose, in their family, he took his son fishing. We learned that he was a diarist, and Charles Francis Adams wrote at the end of that day, when fishing with my son today, a day wasted. But we learned that his son had picked up the same habit of his, that was keeping a diary, and he wrote in his diary, we still have it to this day, Brooks said, I went fishing with my dad today, the most wonderful day of my life. And we learned that perspective is something that should keep us all in check, because we learned that families ought to be a priority to every one of us, but way too often in our day and time, they aren't. Let me tell you about a very familiar story to me. As I told you, I do quite a bit of marital counseling, And I had a family to come in, and what happened was, especially what was going on between the husband and the wife. And the wife came in, I talked to her, and I said, you got to get your husband in. We brought him in, talked to him, then I talked to both of them together. But it really came down to this. Let me say, most of you are familiar with that Brad Paisley song about how he loved to fish, and that his wife gave him an ultimatum that if he went fishing that day, by noon she'd be packed up and gone, and he had to make the choice. And you remember we get to the chorus of that song, and he says, I'm going to miss her. Well, we can laugh about that because that's not real life, but let me tell you about real life, it isn't funny at all. Because that pretty much was the situation with this family. It wasn't that the wife minded him going fishing. She didn't mind him at all having other habits and just recreational activities. But she did have a problem when he did that so much that she was neglected and the kids were. And that was a problem in this family. She said, I don't care if you go fishing, it's fine, but you're out there all the time. Our kids are growing up and they need you. You spend no time with them, and you don't spend time with me. Every spare moment you're out there, and he was involved in some of these tournaments, and not only that, he was in charge of some of the tournaments, and it just took so much time. And it really came down to that in the end. And I looked him in the eye and I said, do you not realize that your wife is telling you, she's not asking you to give up something that you enjoy, but she's just saying, let's be balanced in our time and spend time with them. Do you not realize if you don't do that, you're going to lose this family? And he never would say a word and didn't say anything much more than bye when he left. But he didn't set his house in order. He didn't make his family a priority. And as a result of that, that ended up to be a broken family, and such a sad thing that he could have changed quickly if he had only made his family a priority. So I'm encouraging all of us as husbands and wives and kids to make our family a priority. I'm not saying it's the only thing you can do, because obviously there are other things we must do in life, but family should be high on our priority list. That's number one. You shall make your family a priority. Number two, you shall keep your spiritual lives in order. Probably most of you remember Joshua, how that when he gets toward the end of his responsibility of leading God's people into the promised land, that he stands before them and he charges them and he tells them, you've got to make a choice. He said, you can choose the gods of our fathers on the other side of the river, or you can choose to serve the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. But I'm telling you what we're going to do as our family. We're going to serve the Lord. So he made his family not only a priority, but he also set spiritual priorities for his family. Now, as you think about with your family, is your family built around Christ? Or is it Christocentric? Or is Christ number one in your family? That's either a yes or a no question. But I was thankful, as I told you yesterday, to grow up in a family where I had that. And I've tried to have that with our own kids and with Judy and me to this day still, that we have our spiritual lives in order. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. What things? The things that distract us, the things that we worry about, the things that we give far more attention to than the things that are more important. So we need, number two, to keep our spiritual lives in order. As we move on to number three, you shall pray for one another. There's an interesting passage that is given in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. And we learned that there's a good family passage beginning with verse 1, but we get down to verse 7. And we learn that husbands are to dwell with their wives with understanding. And he is to give honor to his wife as unto a weaker vessel. Physically, it's talking about, not in other ways. And as to the grace of life. That, and we sometimes ignore this part, that your prayers be not hindered. That your prayers be not hindered. That could be personally, or it could be together. If we're not the kind of people that we should be as a family, then probably our prayer lives are going to suffer. I don't ask you to raise your hand, but I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you husbands and wives pray together? I didn't ask leading a prayer before the meal. I'm talking about praying together. How many of you husbands and wives pray together? According to what we know, even among Christian couples, only about 28% of Christian couples actually pray together. 28%. Had a man to probably identify the real reason for that. Even though they might have active prayer lives individually, they don't pray together. And he said, here's my problem. He said, when you're praying out loud with God, he said, you got to come clean. And I said, you're right, you do. And he said, but yeah, my wife is listening when I come clean. I said, yes, and the thing that you fear is also the thing that probably will bring you closer together. We need to pray for one another. Parents, let me ask you something. How can you send your kids off to school in this day and time without praying for them because you know the dangers that might well await them? But I'm not talking about only the physical dangers. I pray for my kids, always have. Pray for my grandkids now every day as they go off to school, the ones that do. And I pray that God will keep them from the evil one because they're exposed to so many things. So many things. We need to pray for one another. Wives, you need to pray for your husband. Husbands, you need to pray for your wives. We need to pray for our kids. Kids, you need to pray for your parents. Because we are in a very real spiritual warfare in this world. And I guarantee you, Satan would like nothing better than to tear your family apart. And he's doing everything that he knows how to do just that. Pray for one another. You shall pray for one another. Number 3, as a commandment that every family ought to have. Number 4, you shall respect one another. You know the passage, but let's look at it one more time from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We sometimes call it the love chapter of the Bible, but there are some great things that are said there that we need not overlook. And we learn that love, and isn't that really kind of a basis for our marriages? That love has to be a big part of that. And we learn that when we love one another, and we're talking about husbands and wives and parents and children, we love one another, and we learn that if we do, then love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. This is from the English Standard Version. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. I don't know if you've ever done it this way or not. If you haven't, you ought to. And instead of putting love, put yourself there. Just put I, and I don't mean talking about me only and what I do. I'm talking about yourself. I am patient. And I am kind, and I'm talking about in the family. And I do not envy, and I do not boast. I'm not arrogant, and I'm not rude, and just keep on through this. And how well does that fit you in your family situation? Have you ever wondered why God, in fact, we've already referred to it this morning in Ephesians 5. Ever wondered why God tells husbands to love their wives? You might say, well, what? But God knows. And have you ever wondered why there's emphasis on how the wife is to treat their husbands? And you think, well, shouldn't that be the way it is? After all, we're married. That's the reason we got married. But here's the truth of the matter. Sometimes we can be the ugliest, and we can say the sharpest things, and we can be the crudest, and we can be the most disrespectful to those in our own families more than we do to strangers. Isn't that interesting? I believe that's exactly why God said what He did and why He reminds us time and again that how we are treated in families is very important to all of us. Let's take church life, for example. You have had the experience of visiting other places, I'm sure most of you, and sometimes, I'd say most of the time, that's very pleasant, as it has been for us to come here and be with you. However, I would imagine that some of you had the experience to also go to some places that you didn't feel very welcome. And that's sad, and I'm glad that that's exception and not the rule. I wish it didn't exist at all. But when you go to somewhere and you feel like you would about have to trip somebody to get them to speak to you, that's not a good thing. Christians need one another, and we need that love, and we need that respect of one another. But it's true in the family too, isn't it? I remember one mother one time put a little note on that communication center of the house, the refrigerator. And she made a very poignant statement, but how powerful, when she said, families are Christians too. Families are Christians too. And we need to respect one another. And that takes us into the next point. I would say commandment number 5 is that we need to support and encourage one another. In Proverbs 27 verse 5, one version says that open rebuke is better than hidden love. There are some folks that are very, very blunt with you and about any situation in life, they'll always tell you, but I don't have a real problem with that because at least I know where I stand with them. But we learn that open rebuke is better than hidden love. You've heard that old joke, and it's been made many times. It's not really very good, but it says, I told you the day that we got married that I love you. If I ever change my mind, I'll let you know. I don't know of anybody that appreciates that. I don't know anybody that gets by on that because that's really not the way it works. So now I want to ask you husbands and wives, when is the last time you told your mate that you love them? You might say, I make 100 on that. I told them this morning and maybe more than once. God bless you if you did. When's the last time you told them that you appreciate them? When's the last time you said, thank you for what you do for our family? Thank you for working hard. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the way you raise our children. How much do we show of that kindness and encouragement and support for one another? We all need it. We all need it. Preachers usually stand at the back of the auditorium and we shake folks' hands. Now, I don't stand back there for somebody to tell me you did a good job. Now, if you want to tell me that, that's fine. That doesn't hurt my feelings. But I'm saying that's not my point of being there. And I'm sure that Josh feels the same way. But of all the people that might encourage me, and we all need to encourage one another, that's not just preachers, but I'm just saying that because you know how we used to do things. We all need encouragement, don't we? But I'll tell you what, of all the folks that might encourage me in some way or another, and I appreciate everyone wherever it might be and whenever, there's one that always means more to me than any other, and that is the word of encouragement I get from my wife. We need to support and encourage one another. And we need to let one another know that we love them, that we appreciate them, and that we do support them in all they do. That's commandment number 5. Commandment number 6, you shall keep sin out of your family. We should say we just need to keep sin out of our lives, and that's exactly true. But I don't know why sometimes give ourselves a bye when it comes to what happens behind closed doors or in private. I deal with it a lot. And when I say that, I don't want you to think that it's just a congregation where I preach that, boy, you must have a lot of things going on there. It's no different there than anywhere else. But as I was telling one of your elders last evening, many times I have folks to come from me from other congregations because they are afraid that somebody's going to find out in the congregation where they worship what's really going on in their lives. How about social drinking? Or drinking. We can leave the social out of it. How about foul language? How about pornography? You see, these are things that I hear on a regular basis. They're causing a lot of problems in families. But you and I need to learn to keep sin out of the family, out from behind closed doors, as well as out in public. Strange, isn't it? How sometimes we can be inconsistent with that. And I'm talking to myself too. If someone were to come to my house today and open the door, whether I know them or not, they say, I came to visit with you, and they have alcohol in their hands. And I'm talking about the drinking kind. And I say, well, you're welcome here anytime, but not that. I would have no problem saying that stays outside. That's not something that we allow in this house. And I guarantee you that's the way it would be with Judy or with me. Or if someone were to show up at my house and just say it's a man that I know. He says, hey, we need somewhere to sleep tonight. This is my girlfriend. We're not married. This is my girlfriend. We stay together. And if you just have a spare bedroom, we'll sleep in there tonight. And I say, no, not in my house you won't. If you're married, that's fine. But as far as outside of marriage, I'm not going to have that to take place in my house. Now, you can, if you do it somewhere else, that's your business, I suppose, but I wouldn't encourage it any time, but you're not going to do it in my house. Or somebody is using foul language. I guarantee you, I would have no problem saying, look, we don't do that here in this house. You know, you're either going to have to cut it out or you're going to have to leave, one or the other. I wouldn't have any problem with telling anybody that. But what do? I would imagine that some of you feel the same way, if not entirely the same way. We'll turn on that TV and watch it and watch it. The average TV is on 54 hours a week in the American household. And rather than turning the channel or watching something else, sometimes we'll just allow it to come right on. We need to keep sin out of our families, out of the home. That's commandment number 6. Number 7, you shall keep the romance alive. How important that is. I tell folks all the time that the things that you do to win the love of one another are the very things you continue to do to keep that romance growing and alive. In Genesis 29, there's that beautiful story of Rachel and Jacob, and how that you remember he had to work 7 years just to get her to be his wife, according to her dad, Laban. But he was a bigger deceiver than his son-in-law to be at that time. And you remember that he worked those 7 years, and it's a beautiful expression. It says, it seemed like but a few days because of his love that he had for her. And we learned that after that, he got her after another week, but then he had to work 7 more years and ended up 20 years altogether that he worked. But don't you know that during those 7 years, if they had not done the little things that made them want to get married to begin with, that he might have said, I don't think this is worth it. I think I can find somebody else. I don't have to wait all these years. But the romance continued to grow and blossom. And the same thing can be true in any relationship. I'm going to be discreet in how I say this. But Judy, my wife, is a chocoholic. And she would fully agree with that. So I'm not telling you anything she doesn't know or wouldn't agree with. Sometimes when I'm out and she's not able to go with me, as I'm out visiting somewhere, maybe at night, or speaking somewhere, when I come home, it's not an unusual thing, and I'm not bragging on myself, but I think about her and how she's had to stay home maybe with her mom as it is now, or earlier on with the kids or whatever, and I'll stop by on my way home and get her a Hershey almond bar. Forget about the dark chocolate. I mean, she has her specifics now. This has to be the milk chocolate, and Hershey is the favorite, and it has to be the almonds in there too. So I'll come home with that in my shirt pocket. And I was telling a class one night of young couples, and I was saying, you need to learn how to do these little things. Now, she does a lot more than I do. So let me just tell you, I've never gone off that I didn't get a note or something from her. So she's much better than that than I am. But I'm just telling you that every once in a while I mess up and do something right. Well, anyway, I told them, I said, look, this is a Wednesday night class. You need to remember your wife and just the little things make big things in a marriage. And I said, if you'll just learn to do these, I said, it pays great dividends. And this is the absolute truth, absolute truth. After service that night, we have a little service station right across the highway from our building. I had to stop there and get gas. I went in there, 7 men in there buying their wives a candy bar. But at least they got the message that if you keep the romance alive, it can be just as profitable years down the line and as enjoyable as it is at the beginning. Number 8, we just talked about this in Bible class, but I'm going to tell you one more time. You shall not keep up with the Joneses. We learn that we are to be content with the things that God has given us in this life, and we need to be good stewards of those things. We learned that Timothy tells us, or actually Paul telling Timothy, we didn't bring anything into this world, we're not going to carry anything out with us. And with our food and raiment, that we are to be content with those things. It's not to say we can't have ambition, but we learn that whatever God gives us, we can be content and happy with those things and be happy with our lot in life. Next, number 9, a commandment of families is you've got to learn how to navigate the storms of life. Initially, I was going to talk about the seasons of life, and as we go through different stages in marriages, we face different things, and we do, and I decided to change that a little bit as you have here, but we learned that there are things that are going to happen in your marriage. It's not necessarily that you mess up. It's just some things are going to happen in your marriage. Some of you have already been there. Some of you will. We learned that kids don't always turn out in life the way that we would desire. I pray that that would never be a heartache of yours to experience that, but a lot of us do. With my oldest son, who is not faithful in the church now, it's been a tough road. And I pray for him every day. I pray that God will open his eyes and wake him up and to see how important it is that he gets his life back right with the Lord again. At one point, he was very faithful, but he isn't at this point. He didn't navigate some of the storms in his own life very well, and as a result, it took him in the wrong direction. But you and I are going to face some of those. It may be with husband and wife, it may be with a lot of things, but I assure you that storms are going to come along in your life. Let me tell you a little one that we had to face last year. I usually go and get a physical just out of routine around the first of the year. And so I went, and Dr. Ashley, who is one of our elders there at Killen, is my family practitioner. And so I went to him and had my blood work done and everything. How are you feeling? I feel great. Always have. God has blessed me with great health in so many ways and just no real complaints. And after he got my blood work back, he said, you know, your PSA is pretty high. Never had been before. Your PSA is pretty high. You have any symptoms? No, don't know anything. I feel fine. He said, well, it could be a fluke. He said, let's put you on an antibiotic because you may have an infection, and let's do that for a month and come back and let me check you again. Well, I came back in a month, and not only had it not gone down, it was actually higher than it was before. He said, I need to refer you on to a urologist. This is something that we need to check into. I said, it doesn't mean you have anything bad, but he said, obviously something's going on, and you need to have it checked out. So moving ahead a few months, I actually ended up that the PSA continued to rise, and I had a biopsy. And I remember it was a Wednesday afternoon. I was expecting maybe a call sometime later. In fact, I'd seen the urologist and had the biopsy, and he said, we'll meet again in a week. Well, this is like 2 days later. I get a call from him, and I saw it, and I walk outside. You know, these wives, they have a way of knowing these things. She walks out right behind me. And sure enough, it was a urologist. He said, Stan, it just came up on my computer, and he said, you've got prostate cancer. And I said, really? He said, yeah, you do. And he said, in fact, if you know anything about this, it's the Gleason score 8, which is really high risk. And he said, you know, this is something you can't play around with. You're going to have something done. He said, are you all right? I said, well, yeah, I think I'm all right. And I really was. I really wasn't shaken too much by that. I didn't like what I heard, but it was all right. So anyway, long story short, December the 22nd of this past year, just a few months back, I had to have the surgery down in Birmingham, and everything went well. As far as we know, things have been caught early. But you think about a lot of things when you're facing, you know, life or death in a situation like that. But it wasn't about me. I didn't think so much about me, and I still don't. But I thought, well, you know, I had anticipated one day retiring in my life. I'm enjoying doing what I do now, and I hope to continue with that if the Lord continues to bless me. But I thought, I'm going to have to rearrange some things pretty quickly if something is the worst. And if I'm not going to make it very long, I got to see that Judy is taken care of. And the kids, they can fend for themselves, but I've got to make sure that my responsibility for Judy are taken care of and that she wouldn't have to live in Tent City if something were to happen to me. So anyway, that all worked out fine, and I think that I'm going to be fine. But those are the kinds of things that we mean when we say, you don't anticipate those kinds of things. I don't have a family history of that kind of thing. Where it came from, I don't know. And I probably never will in this life. However, we all face storms of life. And families that are wise, families that are godly, will learn how to navigate those storms as they come along. And finally today, commandment number 10, you shall have fun. The man who finds a woman finds a good thing, or wife finds a good thing, and obtains favor of the Lord. God always intended for the family to be for His glory and for man's good. If you're not having fun, and I don't mean every moment is fun, but if generally you're not enjoying your family life, something's not right. You need to make some changes. Something needs to give, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. But now I ask you this, husbands, are you fun to live with? Are you fun to live with? That was the question. You might say, well, which day are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about all the time. We all have our weaknesses and our shortcomings. But if you just had to evaluate your own personality, the way you do things in family, are you fun to live with? Wives, same question. I know that we all have our moments, but I'm asking you, generally speaking, are you fun to live with? Kids, young people, I'm asking you, be honest. Are you fun to live with? Families should enjoy that time together. And you can, if you're willing to make it happen. But that's really the key, isn't it? What am I willing to do to make this family what it ought to be? You might say, well, he or she, if they would, no. That's not where you begin. You begin with yourself. And so when you think about me and what am I doing to bring unhappiness or happiness to this family, are you doing your job? Are you doing what God expects you to do? Are you being the father that God expects you to be? Are you being the husband that God expects you to be? Are you being the wife that God expects you to be? Are you being the father, the mother, grandmother, grandfather? Are you fulfilling those responsibilities? There again, don't think about what everybody else is doing, but what are you doing to make your family what it should be? Because that's where it all begins. And that's where I will end this lesson. But these are the 10 commandments that I would say if you will take these and apply them liberally in your family, I guarantee you, not because they came from me, but because they came from God, that they will make your family all and more than you ever dreamed it could be. We're going to have a song of encouragement at this point. There may be someone here today that says, you know, I haven't been what I need to be. And it starts with making my life right with God. Perhaps there's someone here today that isn't a Christian. I've never been baptized. I've never been born into the family of God, but I'm willing to do it. I'm really ready for it and willing to start on it right now. If that is the case, we pray that you'll do that. Or maybe you say, well, I've done that, but I haven't lived the way that I should. I haven't been the kind of father, haven't been the kind of husband, haven't been the kind of wife, haven't been the kind of person that I should be. You can make that right. You can be forgiven, and you can start all over again. As we sing this song of encouragement this morning, if you're subject to the Lord's invitation, would you come while together we stand and sing?